So, moving on here to the situation in Ukraine and the escalations around the world as a result of it. For those who are not aware, in recent times, Russian troops have been sort of accumulating around the Ukrainian border. That has been somewhat overstated by American press outlets. At least the rate of it seems to have been happening for quite some time. But at this point, it looks like over 100,000 Russian troops are in an aggressive position. And I just want to note, you guys, as I always do with foreign policy, how hypocritical the United States on this stuff is. Like, we constantly engage in exactly this kind of aggression. And then when another country does it, we hit the alarm bells. So I want to put it in perspective, right? Like, we're we're constantly engaging in exactly this kind of aggression with Russia, with putting ships all around their border, with our actions arming neo-Nazis in the Ukraine right now. That could be considered aggression against the Russians. By the way, when our enemies say, just as an example, we're going to arm Cuba, how did the United States respond? Did we take that as aggression? So for us to turn around now and play innocent bystander who's just engaging in self-defense is absurd on the surface. And to be clear, I'm no fucking fan of Vladimir Putin, you guys. The guy's a war criminal. He's a monster. I would not want him in Ukraine. I have no doubt he would do horrible things. The invasion of Georgia to the annexation of Crimea to on and on and on. The way he's authoritative with journalists, just like what we were just talking about. All this kind of authoritarian with journalists. There's much to hate about Vladimir Putin. Okay, this isn't like an endorsement of Putin. But the way that it's been framed by the U.S. State Department and the U.S. media is outlandish and ridiculous, as though he's the only villain in the situation. Okay. And of course, as we continue talking about inaction on behalf of Democrats when it comes to domestic policy that would help the poor and working class, they have no problem jumping into action to make sure that the war machine carries on. I have an article here to show you in The Intercept. Democrats are rushing through a massive Ukraine defense bill. The House of Representatives is looking to skip markup and hold a floor vote as soon as next week. Democrats in the House of Representatives are planning to expedite a massive bill that would dramatically increase U.S. security assistance to Ukraine and lay the groundwork for substantial new sanctions on Russia, hastening a war-friendly posture without opportunity for dissent as concerns over a military invasion abound. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told members on a caucus call Tuesday that she's looking to skip marking up the bill and move it straight to the House floor, setting up the possibility for a vote as soon as early next week, two congressional sources told The Intercept. The sources spoke on the condition of anonymity because they're not authorized to talk it to the press. Pelosi's office did not immediately reply to a request for comment. Quote, "This is how the space for non-military options gets slowly cut off. It gets slowly closed off, in Washington without any real debate," one of the sources, a senior Democratic aide, told The Intercept. The situation in Ukraine has escalated in recent days, with more than 100,000 Russian troops reportedly stationed along the Ukrainian border, while Western leaders seek to create a unified front to deter what they fear is a Russian invasion. British intelligence released an unusual report over the weekend on an alleged plot to install a leader friendly to Russia. On Sunday, the Biden administration advised Americans to leave the country because of impending reports that Russia is planning significant military action against Ukraine, escalating tensions in the eyes of local officials, and put troops on standby for deployment in Eastern Europe. And I just want to note, you guys, that this seems to mostly be noises coming from the West. Now, again, I'm not trying to minimize or downplay Putin's potential aggression or how awful he fucking is, okay? It's not a defense of Putin's government. But the Ukraine foreign minister himself came out and said, basically, "We appreciate your solidarity, but please stop throwing gas on the fire." I'm paraphrasing, but he basically told the West, what we need right now is not this inflammatory rhetoric. He said that he does not think an invasion from Russia is imminent. So that's from the Ukraine foreign minister. Yet the West is fear-mongering about the situation. Okay, so again, I'm trying to be nuanced here. And get down to the details of this thing. It seems like Russia is behaving aggressively, but Ukraine is not concerned about an imminent invasion. The Western media and the State Department, the United States State Department, are fear-mongering about an immediate invasion, and using it as an excuse to send more weapons to the Ukrainian border. And I want to take the opportunity to note, you guys, that this is another example of Democrats asking the pay for question when it comes to social services and things that would enhance the well-being of their constituents, and entirely ignoring it when it comes to something that would help the weapons manufacturers, like another handout that they don't fucking need. By the way, it's also worth noting that a lot of the groups that we're arming in the UK are literal neo-Nazis. So that's not great either. Just all around bad situation going on in the Ukraine. And I don't want to minimize in pointing out that Ukraine does not seem as concerned about this as the West. I don't want to minimize the potential that this has to spark a massive international conflict, you guys. There are reports that Iran, China, and Russia are preparing for a worldwide conflict. So I'm not trying to minimize the potential that this has to be a very explosive situation. And when you have nuclear powers involved, that obviously is of grave concern. I'm just trying to apply the proper nuance, and it seems like the Western press is ignoring the message from Ukraine, the actual Ukrainians, the Ukrainian foreign minister himself. So much of this noise coming from the West and not from Ukraine, and I think that's worth noting. In a sort of tangentially related story here, I want to show you guys an article about the military contractors. This is from the Quincy Institute. Big war CEOs. There's chaos in the world and our prospects are excellent. With candor you don't hear in official circles, top arms contractors say recent violence and tension works in their shareholders' favor. Now, I want to note there's a taxpayer reference here that I have to debunk in the first sentence. And I love you, Quincy Institute, but this is awful. According to chief executives of the top taxpayer-funded weapons firms. They're not taxpayer-funded, you guys, as MMT teaches us. Currency-issuing governments do not use taxes to fund their spending. And that kind of rhetoric, unfortunately, plays right into conservative hands. If you use that kind of language, please stop using that kind of language. And if on some chance someone from the Quincy Institute is listening to this, please say publicly funded instead. Please. So I'll restart with that phrasing. According to chief executives of the top publicly funded weapons firms, their balance sheets will benefit from the U.S. engaging in great power competition with Russia and China, the recent escalations in the Yemen war, and the potential for a Russian invasion of Ukraine. But at least one CEO didn't want to give the impression that weapons firms are simply merchants of death, claiming that her firm, the third largest weapon producer in the world, actually promotes human rights proliferation. You got to be fucking kidding me. Those comments were all made on quarterly earnings calls this week, at which executives for publicly traded companies speak to investors and analysts who follow their industries and answer questions about their financial outlook. The occasion brings out a degree of candor among companies' fundamentals and their business interests that aren't always disclosed in marketing materials and carefully worded press releases. For example, CEOs of both Lockheed Martin and Raytheon outright acknowledged that a deteriorating state of global peace and security and an increase in deadly violence are very much in the interest of their employees and investors. Lockheed CEO James Takelet, I apologize if I mispronounced that, assured investors that the $740 billion defense budget, 12 times the budget provided to the State Department to conduct diplomacy, could continue to grow in 2023, a critical metric for weapons contractors, the ultimate recipient of nearly half of all defense spending. And they have his quote there. Raytheon CEO Greg Hayes took a cruder approach, appearing to celebrate a potential war with Ukraine and Houthi drone strikes on the UAE as good indicators for future weapon sales. My God. Responding to an analyst question about increased demands for weapons, quote, from international countries, just given the rising tensions. And again, they have the direct quote there. But in a moment of rare self-awareness in the calls, Northrop Grumman CEO attempted to distance herself from the celebration of increased global conflict by making the bold claim that the world's fifth largest weapons manufacturer and a trainer of Saudi troops accused of war crimes in Yemen is a promoter of global human rights. That's Kathy Warden, and they have the direct quote there. So I wanted to make sure you all knew that they're openly bragging about how great this is for business. And I also saw, I can't remember who shared this. I wish I could give him credit, but there was I want to say it was a Politico piece. You know how some news outlets are starting to put sponsors right under the title. So someone shared that there was, I think it was Politico. I'll feel bad if it was the wrong outlet, but I think it was Politico that had a piece about essentially throwing fuel on the fire about the whole conflict in Ukraine. And then right below it, it said sponsored by Lockheed Martin. I mean, I guess at least they're being fucking honest about it, right? Like at least it's just right out there in the open. This is weapons manufacturers telling you this. But as usual, you guys, we are not engaging in a way that, whatever you think of the other actors involved in U.S. foreign policy, it's almost always the case that we're engaging in a negative way, that we're harming the situation. And that appears to be the case here as well. We're arming neo-Nazis and fanning the flames of a potential World War III. That's just not good stuff, you guys. It's not good stuff. It's also a deeply complicated situation in terms of what the Ukrainian people actually want. So I'm not going to go into that because I'm no expert in the matter. But it doesn't seem like it's this clear-cut Putin bad situation in the Ukraine either. So, and again, you guys, I've tried to be very clear. I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. Okay, I condemn Vladimir Putin and his imperialist, aggressive military approach. But it just is a little bit more complicated than most of the outlets in the West would have you believe. And we'll see what comes of it. I hope that Biden's slip up about being more measured and less hawkish was real. Some of you might have seen that. He gave a presser where he basically said our response would be based on what Russia did. I'd rather hear that than like, we're going to hit you hard no matter what kind of a thing. We're going to, put on the tough guy look. But I hope that more measured heads can calm the situation down. But certainly the weapons manufacturers know which side they're on, right? And know where their bread is buttered. So we'll see what happens here going forward. And we'll continue to cover the situation in Ukraine. It has every potential to be explosive, but I want to make sure everyone knows that Ukraine is not as concerned about an imminent invasion as the West would have you believe. So that's where we'll leave that story, and we'll continue covering it as updates come along.